The day before the show at Paul Grant's gym, he was very concerned. He was concerned that his friend Arnold was going to destroy his legend. He was very, very concerned, as his friend's concerned. He told me that, in fact, Arnold told him he was going to go in the show, and how he tried to talk him out of it. So it didn't bother me to hear that he was going to go into the show, especially in lesser conditions, but even if he had been in good condition, it wouldn't bother me. The morning of the show, the atmosphere was much different. There was a tension there. There was a hostility and negativity that skewed everyone's normal perception and, of course, prevented anyone from deriving the pleasure they might have had otherwise. Everything was askew at this point. It was not a normal contest. No one was talking or acting as the way they usually do. There was a strain and tension in the air all the way through. Then the issue of the weight classes came up, and there was a lot of arguing going on between Arnold and a few of the guys. I wasn't even concerned about that. I didn't care one way or the other. I thought I could win. It was a very large room. There must have been maybe 50 or 60 people in there, and Arnold, as usual, wanted to be the center of attention. But he had said something to denigrate Amir Badu in front of everyone, something that was uncalled for. He was making a fool out of himself, but at that time I wasn't concerned. I thought if Amir Badu wanted to defend himself, that was his business. So he was going through his antics. At one point, Boyer Coe stood up as a gentleman and said, look, why don't we just let Arnold explain to all of us right here, right now, what his reasons are for wanting to have weight classes. Maybe we can get to the bottom of this instead of arguing aimlessly. And he did say it in a very gentlemanly fashion. There was no hint of malice or anything negative in his voice. And Arnold snapped back, oh Boyer, why don't you stop acting like a baby? Grow up and be a man. Which I thought was uncalled for. So I said, look, Boyer Coe said that as a gentleman, something to that effect. He doesn't deserve that. And that pissed him off. He turned around very rapidly to face me, and he literally had his upper lip was furled around he was snarling like an animal. He said, oh, come on, Metzger, we all know that you lost last year because of your big belly. And I allowed that to irritate me perhaps too much, and on impulse, I ran over towards him. I was surprised. Arnold Schwarzenegger sat down. I scared him. He went over and sat in the corner, and when he went to sit down, I continued at him. I was wagging my finger at him, telling him that his behavior was reprehensible, that it was not Boyer Coe who needed to grow up, but him. And he couldn't look me in the eye. He literally went from being a frantic, hysterical adolescent to shrinking away like an injured child. And that's really gives you some indication, some clue to his character. Only once I stood up at the pre-judging meeting did that thing come to at least a partial halt. That irritated Ben Weider, and he stood in between Arnold and I and tried to assert himself. I just remember thinking how out of control he was. And equally as interesting was how out of control Ben Weider and the hierarchy of the IFBB were. I thought these were supposed to be the guys that ran the show. But here you had this big Prussian son of a bitch standing up acting like a Nazi. And Ben Weider, who had previously always seemed to pride himself on being in control of things. After all, he never lets us forget he's the president of the IFBB. All of a sudden, he was letting this Nazi walk all over him. He sat there quietly. I realized then that Arnold was the IFBB to a very significant degree. I lost a lot of respect for Ben Weider and the rest of the people associated. They're the ones that were responsible. They let him run wild. He was wild. Joe Weider told me later that Arnold was on cocaine that day. And in looking at some of the photographs later on, I believe that he had an unusually stressed look on his face. The veins on his forehead were distended. All symptoms of being on cocaine. Most likely he was. But it became very clear, especially later on as the day proceeded, that things weren't the way they should the Mr. Olympia, a contest that I and almost everyone else who witnessed it was convinced was fixed.
Well, my immediate gut level reaction was paradoxical as it may sound, was laughter. I just started laughing. It was ludicrous. It was so obviously an incorrect decision that my first response was just to laugh.
It's interesting, at the 1980 Olympia, the only people who saw Arnold as the winner were the 7 judges and his closest friends. None of the other competitors saw him as the winner. None of the audience, or very few, only those that were his friends. If it was just me saying this, of course it could be chalked up to sour grapes. Although that's not true. I've lost contests before. I never raised a fuss. But that particular contest was so clearly fixed that every other competitor and many of the fans in the audience raised a fuss. And of course, in the aftermath, all the magazines carried articles pertaining to the fact that it was fixed, and as a result decided to drop out of competitive bodybuilding. In some ways, I'm glad the 80 Olympia turned out the way it did. It brought into clear focus for me really what the political establishment in bodybuilding is really all about. For years, I was walking around in a fool's paradise. I thought everyone was as nice a guy as I was. I thought that evil was something you just read about in novels and newspapers, when in fact evil is something that's around all of us. This brought it all into focus, and I didn't want to be involved or associated with people like that, and decided to drop out. There was a rift after the 80 Olympia. Actually, it wasn't so much Joe as Ben. There was one time when I was in the office and a phone call came in from Ben Weeder for me. During the course of the conversation, I can remember yelling at Ben. He was not appreciating some of the things that I was saying about the IFBB with regard to the 80 Olympia. And I remember Joe said, "Why are you yelling at my brother like that?" And Joe took the phone and talked to Ben, and I could only surmise what Ben said, but whatever it was, Joe's response was, as I was standing there, "What do you want me to do, Ben? Put a muzzle on the guy?" I was talking a lot. I was saying a lot of things that Ben didn't like. I suspect at one point Ben